Well, hello. My name's Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses, and I like to muse about books. So today I'm all glammed up. Actually, I'm about to go out to watch a friend in a concert, in a gig, at a gig. Don't know. Anyway, so yeah, that's why I'm sort of, I don't know, radiating heat is what I feel like I'm doing. Anyway, I thought about this time of year, I always get the urge to cook. I don't know whether it's because it's dull and gloomy out there in the UK fog, um, but it does make me feel like reaching out for all those old recipes and snuggling up with something nice in a bowl or on a plate or whatever. It made me think about books that involve food, that focus on food, particularly all the books I've chosen by one are novels. So without further ado, I'll plunge in. And the first one that I've chosen to talk about is Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. And again, it's a book that I read many, many years ago, but it made a deep impression on me. And I still can visualise the home, the domestic detail, the relationships, the feelings I had when I read this lovely book. She's a Mexican writer, so it's set in Mexico. And I found that fascinating, actually. I really felt like I'd kind of visited the home and family, a Mexican family. It's a novel that sort of makes you feel like you've travelled to a different place. And anyway, the premise of the book is it's about a young woman who now I'm going to get confused. I think her name is Tita, because I think the next novel that I've chosen to talk about, the heroine protagonist has got a very similar name. Anyway, Tita is kind of sort of trapped really in her domestic life because the family that she lives in, there are no men. It's all women. You know, the men have fallen by the wayside, and it's because she's the youngest daughter. It's the expectation of the family that she should look after her mother as her mother gets older and become, I suppose, what we would have called in the past a spinster. Um, anyway, it's complicated by the fact that she falls deeply in love with a chap called Pedro, and that romance is returned, and he actually marries her sister in order to be closer to her. And the whole sort of novel focuses around the way that they cope with this kind of unconsummated love that they have between the two of them. So it's a really, it's a wonderful sort of dance in that respect. And the other thing that's fabulous about it is, of course, is the food, because every single chapter begins with a recipe, usually for something you could eat, occasionally for some sort of potion, love potion or whatever. And the whole, I think if I remember rightly, every chapter begins with the description of the cooking that's going on in the family household. So it's a very sensory novel. I can't recommend it highly enough. Really thoroughly enjoyed it all those years ago, and it's stayed with me. So that's food novel for foodies, number one. And then my second choice is the novel Mistress of Spices by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. I hope I pronounced that right. Apologies if I haven't. I've read quite a few of her novels, really, really enjoyed them. So this one's called Mistress of Spices. And again, every single chapter is named after a particular spice. So this is an Indian immigrant. She's called Tilo, I think, or Tylo. And you can see why I was confused, Tita, Tylo. And she is living somewhere in California and has her own spice shop. So people come into the shop and buy spices from her. But more important than that, she's been trained to be a mistress of spices when she was younger by some master called the Great Mother or something like that. I can't remember what she's called. And so she can not only use her spices to sort of, use in food, she kind of prescribes them. So people come in and tell her what their ailments are. They might be physical ailments. It might be that they've lost their sight or something awful like that. or there might be psychological ailments or dilemmas with their love life, and Tilo will prescribe spices to help them with that particular problem, whatever it might be. And she's really successful. So she gains a sort of reputation, and her shop is usually, you know, packed with people coming to do just that. Anyway, on one particular occasion, a young American, very lonely, he's the lonely American, comes into her shop. In fact, I think if I remember rightly, he crashes his motorbike outside the shop. I think that's how he ends up in there. And she falls for him. And this is deeply problematic, because when she became a mistress of spices, she had to promise 3 things. Now, I don't know whether I can remember what they are. One of them, I think, is that she can't leave the shop, as in, you know, go elsewhere. Another is that she can't touch another person's skin. And I think the final one is that she can't use her spices to help herself. She can use them to help anybody else, but she can't use them to help herself. So this you know, story unfolds, and it's really compelling and entertaining and a lot of fun. But there's also, you know, it kind of, the culmination of the story, I mean, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but it gets sort of more and more intensely dramatic as the story progresses. Well worth the read. It'll warm you up in this chilly time of year. Well, certainly it's a chilly time of year in the UK. Anyway, yeah, I fully recommend Mistress of Spices. My third choice, and I don't see this on bookshelves. I can't even remember how I came across it. It might have been one that Simon of Savage Reads fame gave to me. But it's called An Appetite for Violets by Martine Bailey. And if you're a fan of historical fiction and you also love food, this is a real, you know, winner, I would imagine. So it's set in the 18th century, and it's an absolute romp. It's a riot of a book. The young girl, I think she's called Biddy, I want to say Biddy, the young girl who sort of features in it, she is a cook in waiting. She's working in some grand hall somewhere in England, and she's the sort of undercook. That's her role. So she's a servant. And as a servant, of course, she gets to sneak into various different places in the house. She reads things she shouldn't. She does all the sorts of things. You know, I always think I would hate to have servants, because I wouldn't want somebody else, you know, rooting through my underwear drawers, or, I don't know, reading things that I'd left lying around. So it kind of plays into all my sort of horrors of that kind of lifestyle. Anyway, so she's this young servant, and she has a recipe book that is really important to her, and she kind of uses it as a diary as well. So again, a bit like Water for Chocolate, every chapter begins with some sort of recipe, and there's lots of detail about cooking and food. But anyway, her master is an elderly man, and he marries a much younger woman, Lady Corinna or something like that. And Biddy ends up travelling to Italy with Lady Corinna, and all sorts of things happen, shenanigans happen once they get to Italy. There are murders, there are lies, there's romance, there's all sorts. So yeah, a really entertaining, historical, lively, witty romp. Again, I really, really recommend it. And the final book that I chose isn't a novel, actually. It's non-fiction, but it's a little bit out of kilter, I suppose, with the other books that I've chosen to talk about today. But I chose this because, for me, this has one of the best food moments that I've ever come across in a novel. So it's Brian Keenan's Evil Cradling. I don't know whether any of you've come across this book before. So Brian Keenan is a Irish poet, and also writer and intellectual academic. And he was in Beirut. I would imagine it was I want to say the 80s. And he was kidnapped. So it's not a happy tale. He's kidnapped by Shiite fundamentalists and taken prisoner for years, and spends a long time in solitary confinement. And this book is one that I've dipped into many times over the years. I can't begin to imagine what it's like to be a captive like that. And he's not in solitary confinement the whole time. He also eventually ends up sharing a cell with John McCarthy, also who's a journalist, and the two of them strike up this incredible friendship. They're from very different backgrounds, but the relationship sort of survives the captivity. And there's another book I read where they go on a trip. I think when they were in captivity, they fantasized about some of the journeys they would do if they ever came out. And they go to, I think it's Argentina, and travel by donkey or horseback or something. I did read it years ago. I've not looked at it for a long time. Can't remember what it's called. But anyway, this book is absolutely stunning. The prose is really lyrical and beautiful. It's like, I don't know, eating, if we're talking about food, it's like eating a really rich pudding or something like that, where it's almost too much for your senses to cope with. But anyway, so having spent all this time in sort of solitary confinement, he describes how on the food that he gets is very often, tasteless, unpleasant, monotonous, same thing day after day after day, no fresh fruit, no fresh vegetables, nothing like that. And then one day, for some reason, he's given an orange. And I am a big fan of oranges. I love oranges. My gran used to eat an orange a day, and she lived into her 90s, so I do exactly the same thing. I start every day with an orange. But anyway, so he's given this orange, and the way he describes having been, in this very dark place, no windows, no nothing, for week after week after week, and then he describes holding an orange and the sensory impact on him, the way it affects his sense of smell, the colour. He doesn't actually eat it for several days because he wants to enjoy the smell of it. I mean, that requires a huge self-discipline. So for me, that is the best food memory that I have of writing. And when I read the description, I imagine I've got an orange in my hand. So there you are. And it is a fantastic novel by a very admirable man. Anyway, there we are. That's my 4 foodie choices for this gloomy part of the year. Really hope you enjoyed that. As ever, please let me know what you think of my choices, and also any recommendations for other fabulous foodie books. Take care. Bye.